Hi there, everybody. Thank you for joining me. If you have joined me, if you haven't, then obviously you won't be seeing this. So I don't know who I'm not thanking, but there we go. Don't know where that was going. But anyway, today I thought I'd carry on with morning mood. Obviously, last week we started off by looking or preparing to look at this piece because one of my students mentioned they would like to look at it, but they need to sort of focus on doing some actual composition, arranging, orchestration style stuff around some other studies that they're doing as well. So I thought I'd take it on and hopefully reveal some cool stuff for them and for you guys, anyone who's interested, and also myself, revealing sort of how I break down a piece, how I'd go about it. So obviously last week we did prepare by getting those resources, those key resources together. And we could also add to that list. Probably should share the file actually. Which window do I want? This one. Just rearranging my screen because Zoom screens just moves everything about every time you share different things. But anyway, obviously this is the document. I'll probably try and remember to share it again in the email. But obviously we have the main score here that we'll be looking at today in a second. Reduction score that I don't think we'll use today. And then also, we've got some of these other quick resources that might be handy for some sort of extra research, like writing up what I found and things like that for the website. These could be quite handy just to have as reference. But they could be worth reading anyway. I sort of obviously going off existing knowledge and experience as well. We also know that about Grieg. I think most of us know Grieg, Norwegian composer, sort of mid-late, more late romantic style. So that those kind of bits of information are useful from an analytical perspective because while it's not guaranteed to be functional harmony that he uses, well, you can expect, those elements of functional harmony, triadic, tertiary harmony, with elements of function. We'd probably expect some kinds of like dominants and tonics and things like that, or at least a tonic to be kind of used as a means of establishing a tonal center. We are obviously moving towards those kind of more modal and extended tonal practices, which could be in morning mood. We'll obviously get onto that at some point where we'll have a look at harmony and things. But today we're just going to do a score annotation. But before I start that, I just wanted to say some things that I would probably have done briefly before that. So one of them is obviously have a score read, whether that's with the audio track on here, as I've got ready, or whether trying to do it just by looking at the score without any sound. I think this piece is quite a good one for that because it's quite well known, isn't it? So, you're getting that audiation, that connection between what you see on the page. If we just look at the score alone, because we know it, we can sort of piece it together, and that will obviously reinforce reading with that kind of audiation. So if we go on to another score, perhaps we're less familiar with it, we might be able to sort of imagine the sound audiate in our minds by looking at the notes on the page. So that's something we'd do before. We've done it. Obviously, again, this is quite a well-known piece, which is handy for us so we can sort of imagine what we see in our heads as well. The other thing is to, as we move to the score, before starting to look at it, is score prep. So one thing I really recommend doing, sometimes I actually copy music out and then use my own score because I like that kind of connection with music, but I'm not going to do that this time because I thought that would be very compelling viewing for you to see me copy out music, because I'd probably be sat in focused silence and you just see me clicking buttons. Whereas today, hopefully, I'm going to provide a bit of a commentary while I annotate this score. But yes, what I was going to say is this numeric adding of bar numbers, very handy. Obviously, some parts have them. It's not so common in older orchestral parts. You do get rehearsal marks, which should be some here, but they're quite. They're obviously referencing sections in here will be useful to our analysis, but they're not very good, obviously, if I'm going to end up trying to communicate where something happens, a bar number, and having the bar number at least where we can count along the line of music, the system of music. At least we know we can get there in a matter of seconds rather than going, oh, it's 20 bars before rehearsal mark A. You somehow got to count back and hope that the person reading your analysis or listening to the analysis does count the same way you're counting. So at least here I've got these numbers now, and I can say bar 8, 6, 7, 8, and we know we're talking about this bar along here. So that's something worth doing before, rather than doing it as you go along, so we can actually just dive straight into score annotation. And I'm going to just see how far we get today with score annotation. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time, whether we'll get all the way through it. But one thing I like to do is not try and capture everything at once. I like to sort of layer different observations as I pass through the music several times, and ideally across, even if it's only bits and pieces every now and again, but layering it across several days. I always feel like, for the same for composition as well as analysis, that if you wake up not as a different person, but a fresh perspective every time. And I find if you can iterate over several days, that the brain does work that you're not really expecting when you come back fresh. These new observations or corrections to previous observations. You don't always get your observations bang on, and that's not something to worry about and stress over. Hopefully I'll get all of mine right for this, but that, again, I think we can sort of get caught up in that kind of, worrying about being correct, when actually what really matters is the final result, not necessarily the working. We're working towards that result. So today, what I want to do is annotate sort of sections, subsections, by looking at themes. And I've led with themes because this is quite a thematic piece. We've done our score reading. We've done, we know it. It's quite a well-known piece, and it's melodically led. So we're going to build our idea of what the structure is or could be by annotating where themes begin and end. And from there, probably next week, depending on how far I get today, we'll build a table, a tabular analysis of the structure. That's something I like to do, because eventually what I would like to do is try and arrange or compose a piece based on the design of this piece that we've figured out over weeks of analysis, days, but it'd be spread across weeks because I'm just doing it episodically each week. So yes, let's dive straight in anyway. And I get my, if I can move some stuff around here. Just as I say, the Zoom bars get in the way because that's how I'm recording this. Place that somewhere. And I need my markup. Actually, that'll be better down here, I think. Compelling viewing. Me moving things you can't see. Anyway, yes. So we would like to mark this up, and probably a good thing to use is text, and maybe I'm using preview on Mac here. Not necessarily my first choice, but it's the first one that sprung to mind for being able to sort of easily show you today how I go through this piece. So it will suffice. I suppose what would be handy is obviously putting E major here, because that's our key. E major chord here, and the first phrase ends on an E major chord in bar 1, 2, 3, 4. So we could stand to be corrected, but the key signature and the chords suggest E major. So that could be the good thing to put there. I suppose we could, if we wanted, put the relative minor. We're not sure, because there is a C sharp major chord, C sharp minor chord, but it's pretty major, given that's the prevailing chord. But anyway, that's just a note for us, which could prove handy when we, go over the next layer, go over the harmony perhaps, or the orchestration, things like that. But today we're focused on just trying to chop this up into sections so that we can find interesting things in the future. So let's just copy that over because that's easier for me to do. Actually, a theme 1, and that spans from 1 to 4 because the theme repeats here in the oboe. So theme 1, I probably should use abbreviations actually. T1. I always make my systems up as I go, my annotations, to see how they fit. Not really fixed on a solid one. So I suppose theme 1, and this is the first iteration, that's what I'm trying to say. Theme 1, first time. And then we get a repetition of theme 1 here. 2, hopefully I'll remember these annotations when I come round to trying to make my table, my tabular analysis. So that's pretty straightforward, and hopefully we'll start to gain a picture as we reflect on it in a moment as to what's happening. And there's actually a third iteration of the theme here, but it's obviously in a new key. Now, we're not too fussed about discovering what that key is at the moment. That's something that I'll leave to our harmonic analysis. But we do want to say there's a third thing. We could probably give ourselves a reminder that key change. Perhaps I think it is gone to a kind of G sharp major there. G sharp chord. It's basically a transposition. We could add that note in as well, actually. Key change / transposition. It's obviously a modulation as well. He leads us into it. It's like a median relationship. But again, we'll concern ourselves with the harmony stuff at another time. But I suppose it's handy, as I say, just to put this information in so we can remember that there's something going on when we get to that point. T1. And again, a fourth repeat of the theme, but it is important to realize that he has changed stuff, so he has transposed. That fresh key revitalizes it, so there is something different. He's just making enough changes while also planting this this idea into our heads, firmly into our heads. But obviously that kind of repetition doesn't really last in Western music. We're not expecting well, we are expecting the theme to come back. We would expect it to repeat, and from scoring, and we know it does come back. But what I mean is we're not expecting him to simply just keep repeating the same theme over and over again, even if he just changes key. So obviously he doesn't, and we've started to get these little ideas here. So one way we could do this is T1 frag, to say that he's got, these fragments, and we'll eventually, or we might not. It depends where our analysis, how close our analysis wants to look at this section, whether we think there's something to be learned from this, or whether just knowing that he's got a section of fragmented motivic ideas is enough. So this marking will do for us for the moment. T1 frag, meaning theme 1. We've got these clear fragmentation here of this idea. I suppose we could actually annotate that in if we really want to do, to help us out, just to remind us. Again, like, I am sharing this, but and I'm doing my best to articulate what I'm doing, obviously, but normally I do this in cold, hard silence, and just make the markings that I see fit, and sometimes it's not quite so. This is actually surprisingly tidy so far for me. I go backwards and forwards a bit ADHD, I think, when it comes to analysis and composition, even, where I'll flit about wherever my mind takes me. But this will here just tell us that, he's fragmenting this idea. And I suppose here as well, we could sort of see this as a, Now, which one do I want? Possibly this kind, or at the very end. I like the idea of this one. Maybe change the color too, can't we? These two to make it a bit clearer for us. So all we're really doing at the moment is just trying to give us make observations that we can decide if they're important or not later. Excuse me a second. Yeah, excuse me. Sorry, I picked up a cold from my son, who, yes, whenever he gets a bug, I seem to get it as well. I'm wondering if I'm going to sneeze again. But yes, these two ideas here just tell us that this is something to observe, something to look at if we want to in the future. It's there for our discretion. We don't have to sort of remember and hold that information in our heads. It's there. And we know he's fragmented theme 1. And eventually, I suppose, if we wanted to, we could do like a melodic analysis. But then we started to wander into really kind of a detailed analysis beyond the scope of what I think is sometimes useful as a composer. Sometimes I like to kind of get the right balance of information and ignorance as a composer, as weird as that sounds, sort of enough information for me to use creatively for myself, selfishly, I guess, but also not so much that we're just wandering into like analysis that is interesting and perhaps revealing, but that's more from an analytical perspective rather than a compositional perspective. So eventually what I was going to say is obviously we might do a kind of analysis of the melody and break this down into, say, motif A, this little hobo bit here, and motif B or something like that, depending on where our analysis goes. Whether we'll do that, we'll see. But anyway, the notes are there for us to go back to if we want. And moving on to the next page, try and get through as much of this as we can. I was going to try and aim for about 20 to 30 minutes, just to keep chipping away at this. And then I'll either carry on the score annotation later this week and video it, or on my own. We'll hopefully move on to another part, but hopefully getting a bit of an insight into how I would go through this piece to try and annotate it ready for making sort of reductions and or not necessarily reductions of the music and notation, but reductions of the information into sort of digestible overviews like the table, or nuggets of useful bits in analysis, so like extracting parts that are particularly interesting for something that might be useful in the future or useful to me at this very moment. So it's quite important telling here that there's an A rehearsal mark, and it looks like, at least here, there is another iteration of the theme back in E major. I'm going to put that as well. I think this is actually T15, isn't it? At least full. So we're using this marking to say that it's theme 1 again, and the 5th iteration. And he actually, moving on to this bit, so we can see here, whether he's actually doing it exactly precisely, it looks like there's some sort of changes to match the harmony, but they're not extreme changes. Whereas here, what I was going to say is he sort of, there is a more, well, it's not an extreme change, but it is a change, more marked change than before, where he's using this cell here, this motif, and building it out as a transition into B. And this new material, this new idea, which will complement the or counterpoint, structurally counterpoint new interest to theme 1. We'll probably label that theme 2, surprisingly, in a moment. Although it's more gestural, this next theme, rather than kind of as lyrical, clear and lyrical. But that is something quite interesting that you'll find a lot in classical music, romantic music. You will often have these counterpoints of lyrical themes with more sort of gestural, or what's known as rhetorical. And this theory of rhetorical and lyrical descends from a kind of interpretation of sonata form, where often you'd have a lyrical theme and a rhetorical theme. And by rhetorical, often we mean a kind of more motivic idea that, or motivic set of ideas that often provide like the, or at least in both Beethoven symphonies, they're usually the nuggets that re-emerge in the development sections, in the middle sections of pieces, whereas lyrical ones are probably more prominent in things like Mozart. He often has quite bel canto melodies, not always, obviously, but those ones he uses and will often reveal in the development cleverly in kind of canonical contrapuntal settings and other fragments and things, whereas Beethoven, his ideas are quite fragmentary. Sounds like they're disconnected, where actually obviously they're not. You do get whole melodies, but what I mean is that's very much really quite fragmented construction that he can then just take bits out and use. But that's a divergence from this. And obviously here, what I mean is, you know, you've got this core kind of distinction between lyrical and rhetorical, or that's my assumption. Might be a surprise as we go through this analysis and look closer to find that actually it's lyrical. But yeah, what I mean is there's going to be a change, and that's going to complement and counterpoint this idea to keep the listener interested. And it wouldn't surprise me if, you know, Grieg is thinking like that from a compositional perspective. Maybe he's got this morning mood melody, he's got this idea, and he's like, oh, yeah, that's very nice. I'm a bit stuck now. What shall I have as my counterpoint? My B section. I've got a lyrical melody here, so I should probably give something that is not unlyrical, but not so like a singable melody so much, but like I say, a bit more gestural, a bit more orchestral, instrumental, if that makes sense. So yeah, it's back in E major. Oh, I don't need that because I've already done that. And what I probably will want, this is a sixth iteration. Now, don't put alt. I need to give myself some kind of cue, whether I'll stick to the phrase alternate, or just trans, as in transitory. And obviously, I could add another note here. I think it's a bit smaller. My text is quite large. Trans to B. 6, from 26. Using hopefully that'll be enough to remind me when we come back and look at this and try and compile our analysis into something useful. Tends to be from 26 using T1 fragment. And obviously, as we can see here, it's like a sequential rising idea. So we have this quaver idea, step up, keeping it within the sort of diatonic scale of E major. And then we have a new idea here. And I would actually call this a kind of, whether I'd necessarily write this into it, but the way I think about it is a kind of liquidation. Whereas it's nothing like we've really seen before, but not completely detached. So, it's an embellishment in some respects to this idea. If we look at the contour of this idea here, it's the same V-shaped contour and it's descending. So there's these similarities, but a complete kind of breakdown of the material. So the transition really continues. So I suppose this is a transition from A to our A idea, theme 1 idea, to our theme 2 idea. Whereas, this is part of that too. Tempted to put, I suppose the key change is why they've marked the rehearsal mark here, but whether I'd put the rehearsal mark myself as a composer here could be something to consider. Knowing me, actually, I'd put a rehearsal mark here and a rehearsal mark there because that's kind of weird thing that I do. But that's more an engraving thing anyway. Whether Grieg would have marked it up with rehearsal marks for his own sort of use, I'm not so sure. But anyway, we could probably put that little note in there to help us out. Should use my other one. What I'll do is use this here, since it's already there, T2, 1. So obviously theme 2, first iteration. We're expecting a few more iterations of this theme, repetitions or other variations. Trans 27, 28, 29, 30, 31. T2 idea. I'll probably look back at these annotations and think, what on earth am I saying here? But yes, that's I do that a lot with my notes. Trans to 31, T2 idea. I'll put liquidation, but whether I'd use that terminology, I have to be careful throwing words around, which do have those kind of important meanings in music analysis. But in some respects, to me, it works. As I say, you've got this idea, and it's not a complete change, but a change that is nothing like what we've had before. Like I say, it's an embellishment. And it sort of extends this contour, accentuates it, and rather than the ascending idea, there's like a dissipation of energy here. This is our climax, small climax here, as the music dies away and we move straight into our theme 2 idea up here. I suppose again I could use I'll just copy some of these across because it's quicker in preview to just simply do something like this. Like that. Yeah, anyway. So yeah, just hopefully that'll be enough to remind us when we come back and take stock of all our markings and things. So T2, 1 here, different idea. Hopefully you can sort of remember, maybe if we try and find the idea to help us sort of hear it in the background. Let me just share sound. Should do is just to remind us of what that sounded like. Probably going to have to wrap this up in a second because I said about 30 minutes. Sorry about the ad break there. I'll try and remember. Well, whether I'll edit it out, it was only brief. I wanted to obviously keep this as raw as possible so you could see that I have how I try and approach music messily. Now back to the orchestral. you doing? There we go. Yeah, so we've got T2 one here. So I actually called this a kind of continuation of that idea, but as we see in a second, if we move to the next page, it is used as a sort of smaller scale counterpoint and accompaniment to this, an accompaniment figure to this other idea. So it counterpoints this one over here, which is plainly set, but the melody sort of carries on underneath. I'm not going to sing it out loud, but I was just trying to remember in my head there what the theme was underneath. So yes, we sort of get this cross fertilization, which could be worth pointing out as well. And I probably need a closer look at this melody alone to really sort of pinpoint what it's comprised of, because we seem to get this kind of more rhythmic idea. It's quite motivic, and again, repetition of this idea down here. But that counterpoints with this really quite straightforward but distinctive gesture in the strings, and the cello holding these longer notes, and the violins doing that kind of offbeat falling idea. Pardon me again, tickly throat. So yes, we were going to just quickly mark this up to tell us that hopefully that'll be enough. Linked idea from T1, the embellished transitional idea. And that will tell us that, you know, perhaps Grieg has derived this accompanimental figure, this kind of gestural idea from the previous theme, even. So there's keeping everything bound nicely together. Whether you agree with that observation, I'm not sure. It's have to let me know in the comments or via email. And since we're on this page, we'll just make one more marking before coming back another time to it. And we'll probably put T2 2 here. So this is a second starting point if we're using, or maybe perhaps, I mean, the rehearsal marks are giving us a clue here. Perhaps we should really reassess, put T2 and 2 here, and go back and move this T2 1 to there. Now that we've realized that although this seems linked to this, which is nice and clever by Grieg, that is actually the starting point of this new idea. And this on here, this idea here is actually it's the second part, if you like, middle part. So we move that along, but we might move it again. And actually, I want that a little larger because they're my core markings, aren't they? But I think we'll need a closer look at this middle section because, as I say, we had that straight melodic lyrical idea on its own, T1, theme 1, the idea that we really know, and it's often used in television, film, and things to as kind of a relaxing cliche almost. This one is more fragmented, and it seems like we can see, you know, these little ideas, these cross fertilizations, which are slowly revealing this piece to be more nuanced than you might expect. You might think, oh, it's a bit. Well, I suppose if someone wrote this now, you'd probably say it's a bit kitsch. Is that the right term? But obviously in Grieg's time, very different time, so it wouldn't be referred as that. But what I mean is, you know, you look at this and perhaps think, oh, it's just a morning mood. It's that well-known, popular piece, a piece of classical music. But actually, as we are already starting to reveal, there is these kind of little connections, and perhaps that is worth just quickly doing, because I have a feeling I might forget something like that. So if we just take that box there. There. Just to tell us that I'll just go back here and grab that. It's easier than clicking the button and trying to make one from scratch. And then use of melody in what would we call that actually part of the melody? It seems quite foregrounded there. Anyway, we can debate that in our heads next time we look at this piece. As I say, I might record again, just me looking at this piece further as I work through, or I might skip and just do it myself in the background, and we'll move on to like the reduction to the table, the tabular analysis. So if you do watch this and you found it useful, though, let me know, and I can always, make an effort to video me looking at this piece, because I am going to have to score read it anyway, or score annotate rather. So just let me know. And if you've got any questions, feedback, also let me know in the comments or via email. So yeah, we'll leave that there for today, because I didn't want to just go on for hours, because, well, I have other things to do myself today. But if you have tuned in and it has been useful, hopefully it has been, thank you very much for joining me. And like I say, feedback, questions, fire away. Thanks, and see you again soon.